Hello everyone, my name is Conrad on behalf of Camera Stuff. Thank you for joining today's live session. So I hope you're doing fantastically well. As usual, I'm just going to wait for more people to join. In the meantime, if you're joining, please do introduce yourself. Please tell me your name and where you're from. And also, in addition to that, if you have any questions or if you're looking to learn something very specific, please do drop that in the comment section. So pertaining to today's lesson, how many lights you need in studio. If you want to know something specific relating to this topic, please do drop that in the comments and I'll make sure to cover it tonight with today's live session. All right, just going to wait for a couple of more people to join, then we can get started. So otherwise, I hope you're doing well. Hope you have been enjoying these live sessions. If you have any recommendations as to what we can cover in the future, please do that in the comment section as well. We'll make sure to give that a shot as well. All right, so I think we can get started. All right, so today's lesson is all about how many lights you need in your studio, which I do admit is a bit of a loaded question, if not a bit of a trick question. Because ultimately you can create stunning photos using only one light and perhaps a reflector with it as well. You can also create stunning photos using 6 lights. So you don't need a gazillion lights to create stunning photos, strictly speaking. You also don't need a gazillion lights to make it in the industry or to stand out in this industry. There are many successful photographers out there that use only one light and perhaps a reflector with it as well. And they have kind of built a brand or a style around it and have become kind of famous for it, right? So when it comes to adding more lights to your setup, we do that for practical and creative reasons. So you kind of start with one light and add one light at a time when required. All right, so that being said, if you have 3 lights or more, that will offer you the most flexibility. It will give you more options, more playroom, just in regards to different styles of photography or different ways of going or approaching studio photography. But as mentioned, you don't strictly need a gazillion lights. Start off with one light and incrementally build up your studio kit, one light at a time when required. So in this video, we're going to explore all of those options. So we're going to start off with one light and add an additional light and also the reasons practically and creatively why we add more than one light to our studio lighting setup. All right, so as a reminder, if you're commenting from a Facebook group, so being that our Godox group or our SA photography community group, just drop your name as well because I see you as Facebook user. So it's a strange thing with StreamYard that I'm using. Some privacy policy or whatnot. So if you're commenting from a group specifically, please do drop your name as well. But I'm glad you just landed. Glad you have joined. And here from Lungi, I am ready to observe and learn. Awesome stuff. So let's get cracking, shall we? Hello, Brendan. Glad you have joined. All right, so let's start off with the main light, shall we? So we're just going to get the boring slideshow out of the way first, just to make sure everybody's on the same page as far as certain terminologies and certain gear titles are concerned. So the main light is the primary, most important light to your photograph. In other words, for most of what you see in a photograph depends on what you do with the main light. So it depends on what is done with the main light. It is your main exposure and your main creative light. So the main light should have the highest intensity of all the lights being used. All other lights serve the main light. So let me just repeat that. All other lights serve the main light. So they complement the main light. Any additional lighting should not compete or outdo the main light in a manner of speaking. So one can consider your main light as your Batman, and any additional lighting, those are the sidekicks, right? Those all, as I said, complement the main light. So those are the Robins. So the placement of your main light, that depends on the general look and feel that you want to create. Where you place your light will depend on the general quote-unquote mood that you want to convey. All right, so just repeat, your main light, that is the single light source or the first light that you add to your setup. That is your primary source of illumination. It's the brightest light in the setup, and any additional lighting needs to complement the main light. All right, so here we have a model from our program called Satellite 3D. So I'm going to ask you guys, I need to name this model. So please provide a name for this model, and that's the name I'm going to use throughout the entire live video. So please do give my model a name. Right, so you can see the lighting setup on the left, that's just one light being used. So that's our main light. So the main light is also known as a key light, but it's only called a key light when additional lighting is used. So you may have heard of that term key light. Now that's synonymous with main light. All right, so now we're going to add one additional light. So this will be our fill-in light. So a second light placed on opposite side of the main light. The fill-in light's purpose is to merely lift the shadows created by the main light. So if you have light from one side, it's going to create shadows on the opposite side. So you need an additional light or a reflector just to lift those shadows just a little bit. The intensity of which depends on the overall desired look. So you can go up with the intensity or down with the intensity as far as your fill-in light is concerned. The brighter the fill-in light, the fuller the subject is going to look. The darker the fill-in light, the more depth and dimension will be added to your subject. So a little bit more dramatic look if you drop the intensity of the fill-in light just a little bit. Now, that being said, too much fill-in light will flatten your subject. So think of an ID photo or a mugshot, right? So you don't want an equal intensity from your fill-in light. So you want the fill-in light always to be a little bit less or substantially less than your main light. Right, so the fill-in light, as mentioned, should not compete against the main light. It should not be of equal intensity or create shadows of its own. It should be non-intrusive and non-invasive. So I've heard a good description of the fill-in light. It's like breathing. It's essential, but you have to do it in a way that's not noticeable. So an essential piece of the puzzle, if you want to call it that, the fill-in light just merely lifts the shadows, just to provide a slightly fuller look to your subject. The intensity of which depends on the overall. So if you have a higher intensity fill-in light, that just provides a fuller look. If a lower intensity, that just adds a little bit more drama to your subject. Now, you can use an additional light, or you can use a reflector. So a reflector placed on the opposite side of the main light will reflect light back onto your subject. That can, in a manner of speaking, you cheat yourself to a fill-in light by just using a reflector. However, that being said, a strobe or any type of light that has adjustable settings, that just offers you a bit more control, as opposed to a reflector, which maybe throw light a little bit too wildly across your studio. Another way of providing a fill-in light is to bounce light off a ceiling or a wall. So that's an effective way of providing fill-in light as well. All right, so something I should have mentioned with a fill-in light, as mentioned, it should be non-intrusive. It should not provide shadows of its own. So the fill-in light needs to be diffused. So the bigger the softbox, the bigger the umbrella, the better a fill-in light it will provide. If you use a point light source, a very harsh and directional light source for your fill-in light, that may create shadows. So you may have double shadows. So shadow from on one end of the nose and the opposite end of the nose as well. So that is something that you want to avoid. All right, so here with our lighting setup, we can see an additional light added to our setup. So the main light that is illuminating our subject, and a fill-in light from the opposite side that is just providing a bit of fill-in light just to lift the shadows a wee bit. So here you can see side-by-side results, or a comparison, should I say. On the left-hand side, that is one light activated, and on the right-hand side, that is both lights activated. So the main light is still providing the majority of the light, the general look and feel of the image. The fill-in light, not competing with the main light, is just lifting the shadows just a wee bit. All right, now a different type of light, and for many lights that fall underneath this umbrella, is called a separation light. Now the point of a separation light is to separate your subject from the background. So I don't know if it ever happened to you where you have a model wearing a dark t-shirt and your background happens to be very dark as well. So what may happen, in a manner of speaking, your subject, the clothing may melt into the background, right? So you don't have that distinct shape to your subject anymore. So here we can use a separation light, for example, a rim light or a backdrop light or a hair light, just to separate our subject from a darker background. Now, the point of a separation light, it can be used to emphasize the shape and contouring of your subject as well. Okay, so first separation light we're going to talk about is that of a rim or edge light. So the rim or the edge light that is placed behind your subject and aimed at your subject. So rim light, those are used to create a rim or a lit outline around your subject's body by placing a light, as mentioned, behind your subject, casting light onto their back. This is often used to create depth to your image and distinguish the subject from the background. So you may get into that scenario where you have a dark subject, dark background. So you just want that separation light just to distinguish the shape of your subject. The rim light can also be used to highlight contours, shapes, and textures to give your image a more so lively appearance. All right, so this is just one light activated. So that's our main light in operation. Okay, so before I get to the rim light, you can kind of see with the dark t-shirt and the dark background, the subject's body is kind of melting into the background, and the subject's side of the face is also just melting into the background. So with a rim light, that is a light positioned behind the model aimed at the back of our model, which is provide an outline of light just to create that shape, to distinguish the shape of our subject. Now I can go one step further and provide an additional rim light from the opposite side. So we have this full outline around the subject. Okay, so a couple of reasons why we use the rim light is to create that outline to distinguish the shape of our subject. It can be used creatively as well to add a bit of contouring just to emphasize the shape of our subject as well. And we'll explore all of that just in a wee bit. So do stick around for that. So here we can see side-by-side comparisons. On the left-hand side, that's main light activated only. As you can see, the subject is kind of melting into the dark background. Providing that rim light from one side just creates a bit of shape. And as said, you can go one step further and provide a rim light from the opposite side as well. All right, so got our first question. Is there an advantage to use a small softbox with a rim light, or should it be a hard reflector? Very good question. So a hard light source will create a thinner outline in a manner of speaking. So the outline will be a bit more distinct, whereas the use of a softbox will just create a slightly more so diffused outline. Also with a larger softbox, you can create a head-to-toe outline, whereas if you use a pin light source, something a bit too directional, it's only going to illuminate the side of the face or the torso. So it's not going to provide that full head-to-toe cover or spread of light. So a bigger softbox, and we often advise what is known as a strip box. So that's a thin, skinny, very tall softbox that provides a head-to-toe illumination. So it all depends on the overall effect that you want to create, and we'll get into that just in a wee bit. So I'm going to play around with different light modifiers on these different categories of lights as well. So very good question. All right, so let's talk about the hair lights. It's a bit of a... No, so hair light provides a very small effect, right? So with a hair light, that is a light that is placed above your subject, aimed directly at the top of your subject. And it just provides a splash of light, and it's very underrated. Like, many people don't utilize their hair light. It's a small effect, but it provides something quite substantial, right? It does look remarkably awesome using that hair light. So for hair lights, that's another type of separation light that is used to separate the subject, especially if you have a person with dark hair against a dark background. It's going to look like the person has been scalped, right? So you want to provide that additional splash of light on top of a person's head just to separate the hair also from the background. So to provide a good light on top of the hair, a hair light should be placed directly above and slightly behind your subject's head. So you don't want any of that light to overflow onto your subject's face. So here a boom stand will be quite necessary. And I'll show you that in a wee bit as well. So with the hair light, that position above the subject, typically using a boom arm that separates the hair from a darker background. And in addition to that, it can provide this glowy, dreamy halo effect as well. Hey, here's a good question. Are you going to provide the slides available or do we need to write notes? So this will stay on YouTube, right? So this is immediately uploaded onto YouTube after the live. So if you need to refer to the slides again, you can just simply rewatch this video. But yeah, it's a very good point. I may do a written article as well when I provide the slides as well. That's a very good point. I'll look into that. But otherwise, for the time being, you can refer to the YouTube video. It will be uploaded immediately after the live. All right, so this main light activated only. As you can see on top of our model's head, that's quite underexposed. The top of the head is kind of melting into the background. Now to provide that hair light, just adds a splash of light on top of the model's head. So just to distinguish the hair from the backdrop, and depending on how you use it, you can also provide that glowy, dreamy halo look as well. So here's side-by-side comparison. Our hair light also provided a bit of light on top of the shoulders as well. Now, if you don't want that, you can use a very directional light modifier, like a snoot as an example. Here in this example, I used a beauty dish on top of the model. So if you want to minimize the spread of the hair light, you can use something more directional like a snoot. But this I don't mind. That hair light is also providing separation with the shoulders as well. All right, so let's talk about the backdrop light. Now, backdrop light, that is positioned behind the subject and aimed directly at the backdrop itself. A backdrop light can be used for numerous purposes. So it can be used to illuminate the backdrop, to eliminate any unwanted shadows, or to even out a creasy backdrop. So if you're using like a muslin cotton backdrop, and if you want to just blow out the creases of that backdrop, you can use a backdrop light just to blow those creases to hell, as we like to say here. Also, a backdrop light can be used to separate the subject again. So against a dark backdrop, you can just add a spotlight to the backdrop just to silhouette your subject. All right, so that is main light activated only. Now this is with a backdrop light. So that is a light aimed directly at the backdrop and is placed behind our subject. So just to add that spotlight, just to silhouette our subject, just to create that separation. Now you can use a couple of lights if you want to blow out the entire background. So if you want an evenly lit white backdrop, what we like to call the Omo backdrop, the Omo wash backdrop, you need a couple of backdrop lights just to provide that even illumination across the entire backdrop. Okay, so that is the side-by-side comparison. Left-hand side, no backdrop light, only main light. Right-hand side, main light and backdrop light. All right, okie dokie. So we're going to go to a program called Satellite 3D, and we're going to play around in a simulated studio. But before we get to that, I think Jerry is going to be our model's name. So from now on, our model is going to be called Jerry. All right, so this is our program called Satellite 3D. It's a simulated studio environment. It's a program you can download. There's a bit of a cost associated with it. If you wish to purchase it, you can use a discount code camera stuff if you want a 10% discount with it. But just to explain this program, as I said, it's a simulated studio environment. So you can move the lights and see the effect that you're going to get. You can change your camera settings. You can change the camera composition. You can zoom in, zoom out. You can change your camera settings as well. Here you can change the intensity of the light. You can change light modifiers as well. So you can go from a beauty dish to a softbox. And you can add additional lighting as well. You can change the backdrop. You can change the model. You can change the pose of the model. There's a lot that you can do with this program. So if you're interested in purchasing this, the link is in the description. So you will get a 10% discount if you use the discount code camera stuff with it. All right, so let's play around, shall we? I'm just going to go back to my beauty dish. All right, so main lights only with white backdrop. All right, so as mentioned with the one light, that provides the main illumination to your scene. The majority or the general look and feel of your image depends on what you do with the main light. So changing from light modifiers to different light modifiers, going from beauty dish to softbox as an example, the main light will kind of drive the general mood of your image. All right, so as far as placement and settings are concerned, you may have heard of lighting techniques such as Rembrandt lighting, butterfly lighting, short and broad lighting, loop lighting, side lighting, etc., etc. I'm going to dedicate a video for that exclusively, but I'm going to touch on some of these finer details as we prod along. So if you want to know more about Rembrandt lighting, loop lighting, etc., now, there will be a future video exploring all of those, but as mentioned, I'm just going to touch on some details here. All right, so the placement of your light, as far as the main light is concerned, a general guide here is the more straight on your light is. So if the light is more in line with your subject and a camera, the flatter your subject is going to look, but also the friendlier your subject is going to look as well. The more side-on the light is going to be, the more villainous your subject is going to look. So you can see with the side-on placement here, we have a bit more of a dramatic overall look to our subject. The more front-on, the friendlier, in a manner of speaking, your subject is going to look. Also, be mindful, the more side-on your light is, the more you're going to add emphasis to the texturing and the details as well. So as far as porous skin, wrinkly skin, etc. are concerned, that's just going to look far worse than it actually is with the light placed to the side, 90 degrees relative to your subject. So a good starting point would be that of 45 degrees to 30 degrees. Now, something else I should have mentioned is that the more front-on your light is, the fuller your subject's face is going to look. So in a manner of speaking, the rounder your subject's face is going to look. By moving the light more side-on, as you can see with that shadow creeping in from the right-hand side, it's kind of thinning the model's face. So you can go from a rounder, fuller look with a front-on light placement, and going more side-on, you create a more so thinner appearance to a model's face. Okay, as far as height is concerned, a guide here is that your light always needs to be above the eye level of your subject, and the light needs to be aimed at your subject's nose. Generally speaking, these are just guides, so it's not anything set in cement in a manner of speaking. This is a good starting point, right? So the higher your light goes, those catch lights are going to disappear and you're going to get those raccoon eye effect as well. So the shadows in your eye sockets are just going to be a little bit too dark, a little bit too sinister. Now, if that is exactly what you want, by all means, you can raise the height of your light. That is a good starting point, maybe 20, 30 degrees above eye level. Now, certainly you don't want to go below eye level, especially when it's placed quite close to your subject. Now, this is known as horror light, right? So you may have remember as a child telling ghost stories as a kid, you would hold a flashlight underneath your chin. That just gives this overall ghoulish, spooky effect on your subject's face. Now, this is extensively used in horror movies. Now, if you don't want to make your subject look spooky, this is something to avoid. So you want to raise that light above eye level. However, if you have a person in your studio dressed as a zombie or a Dracula, then horror light would be fantastic light to use. All right, so as a rule of thumb, slightly above eye level, about 20 to 30 degrees. Not too high because you're going to get rid of that catch light. If you don't know what the catch light is, let me just zoom in. All right, so the catch light is the twinkle in the eye. All right, so you can see here those little dots in the eyes. So those are the catch lights. Those are direct reflections of the main light source that you're using, or multiple light sources, but we'll get to that. Now you want that catch light because the catch light does provide a bit of life, a bit of spark to the person. If you remove the catch light, the person may look a little bit dull or soulless. So let me just raise that light. So you can see with the catch light disappearing, just makes those eyes look a little bit dead in a manner of speaking. Now again, if you have a person in your studio dressed as a Dracula, this would be a very good option. But generally speaking, you do want those catch lights. So don't raise your light too high, because that may diminish the catch lights entirely. And it's something that you can use creatively and thematically as well. You'll see it in movies. The catch lights are often used to convey character as well. And also, if you have a villainous character, typically they will diminish the catch lights or even get rid of the catch lights entirely. So if you watch an animated movie like Lion King, the young cubs playing young lions will typically have huge catch lights. The villain Scar, the lion, will not have catch lights whatsoever. So it is something that you can use thematically and creatively as well. I remember the movie King Kong, Peter Jackson's King Kong, right? Spoiler alert if you haven't watched King Kong. He was on top of the Empire State Building. The plane shot him and killed him. But you could see exactly when King Kong died is because the catch lights just started fading away, and just disappeared completely, right? Now, those catch lights had no business disappearing because it's not as if the sun disappeared. But it was just something thematically and creatively that the creators used just to convey, that's a bit macabre to say, just to convey King Kong ultimately dying. All right, so catch light is definitely something that you can use creatively. So if you want to add that spark to a person's face, spark to a person, you can just add those catch lights. Just position your lights carefully. Again, if you move the lights to side on, you're going to remove those catch lights as well. So that's just something to be careful with. Something else I want to say, let me just zoom out. Now, we often speak of dramatic lighting, right? Now, what exactly do we mean by dramatic light? So if you want to convey duality or complexity to your character here being your model, you can move the lights more side on. So here you can express a bit of duality or two-sidedness to your character. So you can think of the yin-yang symbol, right? The yin-yang symbol has a light side and a dark side. So here we can see on our model's face the light side and the dark side. So it just adds a bit of intrigue, a bit of interest to your subject. If you want to convey that intrigue, deepness, mysterious look, you can move the light more side on. All right. But to play it safe, as mentioned, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, here and thereabouts. That is a very good starting point. Question, what is the ideal distance between subject and backdrop when using a backdrop light? All right, so a very good question. I'm going to keep that on ice. So when we get to the backdrop light, I'll make sure to cover this question. So if I forget, Johannes, just remind me, just give me a slap on the wrist and I will make sure to cover that. So just keeping that on ice, I'll definitely cover that. All right, so hopefully that covers something, a little bit about the main light as far as placement is concerned. The distance, so how far away your light needs to be. A couple of things here to explore. So the closer you move your light to your subject, the more you'll increase the overall contrast of the light. So the highlights, obviously when you move your light closer, you just need to drop the intensity of your light. So I think that looks good. Right, so the closer you move your light to your subject, the more the contrast of the light will be. So in other words, the brighter parts will appear brighter and the darker parts with shadows, in other words, will appear darker. So by contrast, there's a wide range between the highlights and the shadows. So moving your light too close to your subject, those shadows are just going to get very, very, very dark. So that's something you may want to avoid. So you can move your light a little bit further away just to diminish the contrast a bit. Now, in saying that, the closer you move your light, the softer the light will be as well. Because relatively speaking, your light source here is bigger in relation to your subject. So the closer you move your light to your subject, the softer the light will be. The further you move your light from your subject, the harder the light will be. And obviously, when you do that, you just have to compensate for the distance. So you can increase the intensity again. Yeah, so the light just appears a little bit harder when you move the light source away. Now, this is something I was taught as a youngin', entering my own personal studio career. As far as the placement is concerned, you can use the the size of the light shaper that you're using. So for example, if you have a 80 by 120 centimeter softbox, you need to add those two numbers. So 80 plus 120, that will give you 200 centimeters. Now that is a good place to place your light source, right? So 200 centimeters, that would be 2 meters. away from your subject. That is if you have an 80 by 120 centimeter softbox. If you're using something round like a 120 centimeter octabox, we just need to multiply the number by 2. So that will give you 240 centimeters. So that means you need to place your light source 240 centimeters away from your subject. So here at the moment, I'm using a 55 centimeter beauty dish. Multiply that by 2. That gives us 1 meter something. That'll be the sweet spot in a manner of speaking. But again, this is a guide, nothing set in cement. This is a good starting point. So just to repeat, as far as the placement or the distance of your light to subject is concerned, just use the dimensions of your softbox or whatever light modifier you're using. If it's an 80 by 120 or 70 by 100, just add 70 and 100 together. That gives you 170 centimeters. That is what the light to subject distance, well, that's a good starting point. Thereafter, you can play around a little bit. All right, so looking at this image right here, we can see the shadows are quite dark here. So this would be a good time to introduce our fill-in light. So fill-in light, I'm just going to add a second light. Oops. So that placed on the opposite side of our main light. So for fill-in light, that's a little bit too strong at the moment. It is overpowering the main light, which is besides the point, right? So we just want to drop that intensity. Perhaps pull the light away because we can't drop it any lower. And as you can see with the fill-in light, we're just adding a splash of light just to lift those shadows created by the main light. So if I switch this off, you can see how dark those shadows are. Switching it back on, we just lift it. So here it's just playing around and deciding how much you want those shadows to be lifted. But as mentioned a couple of times, you don't want the fill-in light to overpower the main light, because then your fill-in light will become your main light, which is besides the point. And also as mentioned, you don't want competing shadows, so your fill-in light needs to be diffused. So we can add a softbox here. Now the softbox will kind of reduce the light, and we can just add a bit of extra light, just to fill in those shadows. So you don't want equal intensity, because that's going to look like a mugshot. I'm just going to make my model look at the camera. Now, so that looks a bit too much like an ID photo or a mugshot, right? So if the fill-in light's a little bit too strong, you can create that effect. So you can just reduce that fill-in light a wee bit just to add that dimension and shape to your subject's face. Okay, zooming back out. All right, so personally, I like to place the fill-in lights. I just want to aim it at the area I'm targeting. So those shadows underneath the chin, I know, what's our model's name? Jerry. You know, Jerry has a bit of a beard, so that may create a bit of extra shadow as well. You know what? We're shaving Jerry, so Jerry doesn't have a beard anymore. So my fill-in lights, I just want to aim that directly at the shadows I'm targeting. And just fill it in ever so slightly. All right, so that's the point of a fill-in light. It's very non-intrusive, non-invasive. It just adds a splash of light just to lift the shadows created by the main light. All right, so does it make sense? Are we on the same page? Any other questions? You're welcome to ask. All right, so the precise amount. So you can use a light meter, right, to measure the light on your subject coming from the fill-in light and your main-in light. So this is called main fill-out ratios if you want to be very pedantic. So you can use a light meter to set your fill-in light to be exactly half or exactly a quarter or exactly an eighth of your main light. Now, if you don't have a light meter, there's some trial and tribulation involved, right? So you can set your fill-in light in position. You can go to full power, take a test shot. Okay, you don't like it, reduce the power, take a test shot. Okay, you still don't like it, reduce the power, take a test shot until you see something that you're happy with. So at the start, I used a light meter quite extensively. Nowadays, I just play it by look and feel. So a couple of test photos may be required. Just readjust the lighting in between every shot until you see something that you're happy with. But the golden rule here is fill-in light should not be brighter than your main light. Okay, I'm just gonna get rid of that. So as mentioned, you can also use a reflector. Okay, so I have a tiny little reflector here. We'll make that bigger. Let's make it 110 centimeters, and let's make it a silver one as well. So you can place your reflector on the opposite side and aim it at your subject. And the closer you place it, the more fill-in light you will provide. Okay, so with the reflector placed to the opposite side, that just provides something similar to that in the fill-in light. It just lifts the shadows created by the main light. So you don't need something as expensive as a dedicated light for your fill-in lights. You can use a reflector. You can use a professional reflector, or you can use a makeshift reflector. You can use styrofoam. You can use one of those things that you cover your car's windshield with, just to reduce the heat. Etc., etc. Anything that reflects light you can use as a reflector. Okay, so place on the opposite side of your subject. This bounces light from your main light onto the reflector and back onto your subject. Okay, and the positioning depends on how strong you want that reflection to be. So obviously, the closer you place it, so we're getting in the frame, which is something you don't want, but just to kind of prove a point, the closer you place it, the more that reflection will be. The further you place it, the less the fill-in light will be. Okay, so this is a way of teaching yourself to a fill-in light. You can just use a reflector. However, that being said, an additional light that is adjustable, an additional light that you can use different light modifiers with, that just provides a bit of extra control. So we're gonna jump into the next topic. All right, so we spoke about separation light, so I'm going to put up a black backdrop. All right, so our subject wearing a black t-shirt, very dark hair, black backdrop. The body and the hair is kind of melting into the backdrop, you could say. Right, so here is a good time to introduce a separation light. As mentioned, variety of different separation lights that you can use: rim light, hair light, and backdrop light. So let's start off with the rim light, shall we? All right, so if you can see that, the rim light is just a light that you place behind your subject and you aim it at the back of your subject. That just provides a bit of separation, so we have an outline to our subject. That just serves to separate the subject from the background. It also creates contouring and also emphasizes the shape of your subject. So if you have a subject with an interesting shape, we definitely want to employ the rim light. Now, what example of that can I provide? Let's get rid of Jerry. Jerry's going to stand here in a corner, like a good boy. You may have seen with maternity photos, right? The rim lights are often very popular to use, right? Because it provides that outline to the model's body. So I think we have a pregnant woman here somewhere. It has to be Jessica. Okay, so Jessica. I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but we have to make Jessica pregnant. Okay, there you go. Turn Jessica. I'll probably have to give her a better pose as well. There we go. All right, so just going to place Jessica here. Now I'm going to switch off my main light, right? So main light off. All right, so the rim light, that is providing the rim around our subject's body. Okay, but it's a little bit too intense. I'm going to drop the intensity a wee bit. All right, and I think the rim light is also just a little bit too broad, right? So we can place it a bit more behind the subject just to thin that line. Something else you can do is add a grid. So the grid will just diminish the light a little bit. So you just have to aim it carefully. And just add a bit of intensity. Okay, so this is a very popular thing to do with maternity photos or anything with an interesting shape, manner of speaking, right? So you add that room light, you switch off your front light. Now, if you want to provide a bit of fill-in light, you can switch this on, just reduce it ever so slightly. All right, so as far as the room light is concerned, I think it was a question, what type of light modifier do you need to use? Okay, so at the moment we have a reflective dish on. Now it's a bit too focused, right? All the light is kind of hitting the shoulder area. So what we can do is get that strip box on. Now, as mentioned, the strip box is a tall, skinny softbox. As you can see what it looks like, it's a very tall and skinny softbox. Now we can add a grid to it as well. So the honeycomb or egg crate grid that you can attach to the front of your softbox. That just helps to guide the light a little bit more. So it just prevents light spillage going from both sides. So if you don't want light on your backdrop, if you don't want light spilling into your camera, which is very important to say, you don't want light into your camera because that may create lens flare. So the grid just helps to minimize, to focus the light, just to constrain light spillage going from too much to the sides. All right, and as we can see, as opposed to the reflector dish, that strip box is providing a head-to-toe coverage. So it's not focused on the midriff area. So it's going from the head all the way down to the knees. So it's an even spread of light. There's a big reason why the strip box is so popular. It just provides a taller projection of light in a manner of speaking. All right, so what we can do is copy paste that. We add 2 strip boxes now. Maybe reduce that a little bit. All right, so with 2 edge lights, we can contour or outline the entire shape of our subject. I think we're going to move Jessica to one side, bring back Jerry. Just increasing the intensity out of the way. All right, so what we can do with room lights as well is kind of contour the shape of our subject as well. And again, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but we are going to remove his shirt. So if you want to do fitness photography, this is a very, very popular technique. So the room lights kind of skimming across Jerry's body, it just adds contouring depth and shape to the musculature, right? So when it comes to fitness photography, this is a very, very popular thing to do. Let's probably give him a better pose. Let's free up those arms. All right, so we can see with the rim lights here, it's just skimming across the musculature. It's just adding shape, dimension, and contouring to that musculature. So you may have seen this in fitness magazines or whatnot. This is basically what you do. So you just provide the 2 rim lights from either each end. You can switch one off. So I'm switching off the left one. I'm just going to turn Jerry to kind of face that rim light. So it's a very dramatic image. What we can do is switch that light back on. So the main light is coming back on. We'll just ask Jerry to look at the camera. All right, so a very popular thing to do with that rim light. If you want to contour the subject, the shaping of the subject, should I say, that rim light will just skim light across the surface area and just provide that depth and dimension. Okay, shirt back on, Jerry. Okay, I think let's go back to the black shirt. All right, so a couple of reasons why we use the rim light. So it just adds separation. So if you have dark subject, dark clothing against a dark backdrop, You just use that rim light just to create that outline that will separate the subject from the background. You could also use a rim light to contour the shaping of your subject as well. Examples what we saw with the with Pregnant Jessica and Muscular Jerry. Okay, getting rid of the rim lights. Okay, moving subject a little bit forward. All right, so let's use a backdrop light, shall we? Okay, bring in an extra light. I'm just going to delete Jessica. I know that's terrible to say, but Jessica's gone to heaven. Some things I never thought I would say out loud, but here we are. All right, so aiming the backdrop lights directly at our backdrop. Alrighty, so with that backdrop light provided, or illuminating part of a backdrop, so we're creating a bit of a spotlight effect. We can reduce the intensity. So that's just providing a silhouette to our subject, right? So that just creates that separation. It brings a bit of depth to our image as well. So we have what you can call a three-dimensional look to our image. So we have separation from the subject is separated from the backdrop. So it just looks a bit more 3D in a manner of speaking. Right, so I think it was Johannes who asked, what's the ideal distance between subject and backdrop when using a backdrop light? All right, so you need to provide a bit of space, right? Just to give your backdrop light a bit of space to operate. So the further you move your subject from the background, the further you can move your backdrop light as well. So that just provides a bigger spotlight. Let's just move Jerry to one side just for a moment. Right, so it just depends how big you want the spotlight to be. So the closer you put it, the more intense but smaller that backdrop spotlight will be. The further you push it away from the background, the more you'll provide an even illumination across the entire backdrop. Sorry, losing my words here. Right, so the distance depends on the effect that you want on the backdrop, right? So the closer you push it, the smaller that spotlight will be. Let's move it to the side so you can see. The further you push it away from the background, the more even the spread of light will be across the entire background. Now, if you can't move your subject, so let's say you limit it to a space, you can use the reflector dish with a couple of grids as well. Now, similar to the strip box, you can use, okay, so here we see our reflector dish attached to our strobe. So you can use grids as well. So we have a variety of different degree grids. So the degree depends on how small you want that spotlight to be. Okay, so with a 10-degree with a 10-degree grid attached to the reflector dish, it very minimizes the size of that spotlight. So you can see how small that spotlight is now. You can choose a different grid. So let's say a 40-degree grid. That's obviously going to enlarge the spotlight. Okay, so if you can't play with the distance, so if you're limited to a space, but you want to play around with the size of that spotlight, you can use a reflector dish with a variety of different grids. So 10-degree grid, that's a smaller spotlight. 20 degrees, that just gets a little bit bigger. 50 degrees, a little bit bigger. 40 degrees, and so forth. Okay, so it's just a honeycomb attachment that you just attach to the front of your reflector dish. So that just helps to constrain light spillage. So it just minimizes your light into a smaller focus of light, a smaller projection of light. Okay, so you can think like it's like a mag light, right? So with a mag light, you can increase the spread of light and you can decrease the spread of light. So you can use a big blanket of light, or you can minimize that light to create a spotlight. So you can do something similar with honeycomb grips. What did I say? Grips. Honeycomb grids attached to your reflector dish. All right, so Judy comes back. Okay. Now, a problem that you may get is, so if you want to do a full-length body shot, right? Now you can see the light stand in the image. So you can barely see it, but it is there, right? So this is a problem of having the light directly behind your subject. If you want to do a full-length body shot, you're going to need to do a lot of Photoshop afterwards. However, what you can do is obviously just move it to the side. Okay, so that is out of frame. But because of the way light works, obviously you're going to have heavy light on one side, and that's just going to taper off to one side. So if you don't want that, you can just add an additional backdrop light, just to create a bit of symmetry, right? So just to get a little bit closer. So I have two backdrop lights in operation here, 1 and 2. So if a backdrop light here on a backdrop, that's just a bit more symmetrical. So just to reiterate, if you switch one off, you're going to have a heavy amount of light on one side. If you use both, you can create a bit of symmetry. Okay, hopefully all of this makes sense. If you have more questions, please do drop them. Okay, so the point of a backdrop light is to create that separation, so we can silhouette a darker subject using dark clothing or having dark clothing on against a darker background. Okay, so what's missing? Oh yeah, the headlight. Let's do the headlight, shall we? Gone and gone. Zoom back in. Sort of get to that hair. All right, so subject Jerry has very dark hair and it's kind of melting into the dark background. I'm going to make it slightly worse, right? So I have a beauty dish here. I'm going to grid the beauty dish. I'm going to add a honeycomb attachment to that. So the honeycomb, that just constrains the light. It just minimizes light spillage. It aims for light directly where I want it. So you can see the top of the head is now totally, melting into the background. So what we can do here is employ a backdrop light. And I think I'm going to use an additional beauty dish, right? So changing light modifier to beauty dish. All right, so the hair light is positioned above, just like that. All right, so slightly behind the subject with the light aimed directly at the subject, the top of the subject's head. Okay, but we have a problem. You can see the light stand in the image. Yeah, so we have a light stand growing out of Jerry's head. So, okay, so this program doesn't have boom stands, right? What you can do is just remove the light stand. I know that doesn't make sense, but when you want to use a headlight, you need to use a boom arm, right? So boom arm that will take the light stand out of the frame. Okay, so here we can see the positioning of the headlight. All right, a good way of gauging where your headlight is, you can switch the main light off, right? So here we only have the headlight in operation. Okay, so I think it's a little bit too broad. So it's going down to the arms, etc. I'm okay with the shoulders, but we can grid that as well. Okay, so the grids are incredibly useful if you want to be a bit more directional with your lighting. So what you don't want, you don't want your headlight to overflow onto your subject's face, right? Because that's going to compete against your main light. So make sure that it is slightly behind your subject, so you don't have that overflow of light on your subject's face. So it's always a good idea when it comes to using additional lights to switch off individual lighting, just to see what every light is doing. So here, as an example, we switched off our main light. We're just kind of gauging where our main light needs to be. Oh, sorry, our hair light, should I say. Okay, switching main light back on. All right, so we can see the hair light, as I said, very underrated. It just provides that wash-off light on top of our subject's head just to create that separation. Now, if you have a model with lovely hair, big curly hair, you can provide that dreamy halo effect with it as well. So it's a very popular thing as far as beauty shots are concerned, especially if you're doing shots for a hairdresser. You want to employ this hair light. Okay, maybe a little bit too intense, so we can reduce that. All right, so what do you think? Looking good? Bada bing, bada boom. All right, so I'm going back to white background. Okay, I'm going to explore the use of backdrop lights to fully illuminate our backdrop, right? So it's a very popular thing that some photographers love doing, is to do that OMO backdrop, as we call it, the totally white backdrop. So I'm just going to show you how to go about doing that. So move our subject a little bit away from the background. All right, so I'm switching to, what do we want? 120 centimeter octobox. So you can see the massive change going from a gridded beauty dish to a very large softbox, right? So it's just a nice big soft light that we're now illuminating our scene with. All right, so as you may notice, we have this shadow on the background. You may want to get rid of that. And also, despite using a white backdrop, it looks a little bit gray, right? Move you a little bit. Okay, let's do some tinkering here. All right, so I'm placing a light and I'm aiming it directly at the white backdrop. You may want to get it a little bit more behind our subject. So I'm going to ask my subject to move forward a little bit because I don't want any light spilling on the side of our subject. So I want all of this light aimed directly at our backdrop. What we can do is copy paste and add another one. All right, so we're providing plenty of illumination to our backdrop. So if you want that white backdrop, this is typically how you go about it. Okay, something I don't like are these harsh highlights in shadowed areas that these two lights are creating. So if you can see on the background, you can see those pools of light. I just want to diffuse those. So I'm going to use a couple of umbrellas. Okay, so from one side, that shadow is now diffused. So let's do the same with this light. Okay, so this is how I typically go about it. If you want that white backdrop, I use reflective umbrellas. So reducing the main light a wee bit. I'm increasing the intensity of our backdrop lights just to create that white backdrop. All right, so if you want that clean white look, you're going to need to use a couple of backdrop lights, right? So aim directly at the backdrop. Most likely you're going to need two of them if you want to do full-length body shots to create that even spread of light across the entire backdrop. Let's switch this light off. Right. So this is something you want to avoid. You don't want any light spilling onto your subject. So just to reiterate, our main light is off. So the main light goes away. Okay, so you don't want light spilling onto your subject. What we want here is a clean silhouette when using backdrop lights. So we can ask our model to move away from the background. So if you have a lengthy backdrop, you can do that. But for closer, you take your subject to the background. That's just going to fall into the backdrop lights. I think something else that is playing a part here. So our studio walls are white. Let's make that gray. I can see what a big difference that makes, right? So I think what happened here, the lights spilling from the backdrop lights, that's just reflecting off the white walls and the white ceiling, right? So that's just going to reflect back onto the front of your subject. Now, if you have dark walls, you can just prevent that from happening. So just to show you the difference again, so we have black walls here, so that's going to suck up the light, that's going to soak up the light. With white walls, you see just reflecting back onto your subject a wee bit. So typically speaking, in the studio, you want slightly darker walls. Right, just to make sure that you don't have unwanted light spilling all over the show. Okay, so I think that's more or less what we want. So it's a nice silhouette. Bringing back main light, switching that on. Just need to composite properly. Good advice from my side. As a photographer, step back and zoom in. You're going to get less or fewer weird distortions when you zoom in, right? So if you have a wide angle lens, you're going to get all of these weird angles and distortions. So it's actually quite difficult to position your camera. As soon as you go down, the head goes above the top of the background. If you go to up, well, obviously we have the problem of the background being in shot. So step back, zoom in. Make that brighter. Okay, and I think what else we can do is fill in light. So it's nice if you can just copy and paste everything. Imagine if you could do that in real life. Okay, so fill in light, that's our light we're going to use just to soften the shadows or to lift the shadows created by our main light. All right, so you may still see some shadows on the ground. I would advise you to keep those shadows. If you get rid of the shadows completely, then it's going to look like your subject is floating in white space. That looks a little bit odd to me. It looks like a product catalog. I don't personally like that, so I want a bit of shadow on the ground just to provide a bit of grounding. Okay, so I'm still happy with the shadow here on the ground. Okay, so if you want that white look, that's basically what you need to do. Just aim the lights. You can move these closer, in fact. Okay, just be careful. If you move it too close, the floored area of the background is going to look a little bit too dim, so I'm just going to stretch that back a little bit. Okay, so you just need to play around with the distancing, take a bunch of test shots, move the lights around until you see something that you're happy with. Okay, so this is how you go about creating that clean white look. Yeah, a couple of backdrop lights are necessary. So backdrop light cannot only, well, backdrop light, it's not only there to separate subject from background if you use a dark background, but if you want to create that clean white wash look, just add a couple of backdrop lights. Alrighty, so let's see with my notes if I missed anything. Okay, something else I want to do. Bam, bam, bam. You pose. No, trying to find a different pose for Jerry here. Yeah, let's do that. So you may have heard of butterfly lighting, right? So butterfly lighting is when you place the light directly in front of the subject, right? So you can see it's in line with the camera and the subject. Obviously, you have the light stand of the image. So here a boom stand will be necessary. Fortunately, I don't have a boom stand in this program, so I have to get rid of the light stand. So we have a light floating in space here, but in real life, you're going to need to use a boom stand, right? All right, so let's get back to Beauty Dish. Okay, so this is called butterfly lighting. The reason why is because the shape underneath the nose, the shape of the shadow resembles that of a butterfly, hence butterfly lighting. So it's also otherwise known as paramount lighting, or what's it called? Something to do with a crab. Never mind. Yeah, so it's either called paramount lighting or clamshell lighting. That should I say. It's not a crab, it's a clam. Clamshell lighting, I'm confusing my animals. All right, so we can see the position of the lights here. I'm just going to move a little bit closer. So the reason why it's called butterfly lighting is because the shadow underneath the nose resembles that of a butterfly shape. So we probably want to get that a little bit more in line. Okay, so the reason I'm showing you this is because there's a different way of using a fill-in light. That is to provide what is known as a kicker light or a bottom-up light. So mono light, that. So basically, you're going to provide bottom up light. Move that a wee bit closer. Okay, so obviously here it's a little bit too intense. We're creating hotter light, so we just want to reduce that. Probably get a softbox on it. Let's try a different softbox. Slightly bigger, like a 80 by 120 or 60 by 90. That will do the trick. Okay, and the reason why it's called clamshell lighting is because when you look at both of these light modifiers, it does resemble the shape of a clam. I know you probably won't see it, but you have one pointing downwards and one pointing upwards. So it kind of looks like a Pac-Man, ready to bite onto a subject. Okay, so there's a different way of using a fill-in light. So if you have that top light, and you can increase the lighting there as well. I just want to see if I can turn my softbox. Let's see, I can. Okay, ideally, you want your softbox to go horizontally. So vertically like this is going to create a weird catch light here. So you want that going horizontally as opposed to vertically. I can't seem to do that. Let me try and find a different light modifier maybe. And that's something around. Okay, so top light is providing our main illumination. Let's switch that off. We can see what the fill-in light is doing. So it's a bit too hotter light for my liking. Switch that back on. That's our main light, switch back on. All right, so without a fill-in light, we can see the dark shadowing in the eye sockets, especially underneath the jawline area. So we can fill those shadows in just by providing a spill of light or a splash of light from the bottom up. Let's get our composition right. Alrighty, so this is a very popular technique used by beauty photographers, right? Because it does create a symmetrical, should I say, if you have a person with a symmetrical face, this type of lighting does excel. A person without a symmetrical face, so most of us have asymmetrical faces, right? So with an asymmetrical face, this is probably not going to look that good. However, if you have a person with a symmetrical face, this lighting technique does excel. So I often find this with beauty shots. The butterfly lighting, if you provide a fill-in light, this is known as clamshell lighting. You can also do a reflector, so you can actually ask your model to hold onto the reflector. That will provide a bit of fill-in light from the bottom up as well. I think let's go to a different colored backdrop. So let's try purple, right? Zoom out a wee bit. Yeah, I can't zoom out too much because you have the softbox in the way. So just have to composition your shots properly here. Okay, so here's a different type of hair light. So it's with a light aimed directly at the back of our subject's head. So you just need to position that carefully. So as you can see, it provides this glowy, dreamy halo look. So if you want to create something that looks angelic, if you have a person with a big, nice bush of hair, it just provides that angelic look. So it's called halo lighting. So that is with the light placed directly behind the subject, aimed at the back of the head. So this provides that outline around the hair, and as I said, just looks a bit dreamy, that halo effect, that angelic look. That is something that you can play with. So I'm going to turn this around. I'm moving the entire backdrop. Don't want that. In, come on. On backdrop. Okay, I'm just utilizing a backdrop light just to add a bit of interest to our backdrop. Okay, so I think that looks good. Something else we can do is get that hair light going. Okay, so I'm just adding a bit of light on top of the model's head here, so you can see the positioning of that. I'll switch that on and off so you can see the difference. So it just adds more highlights to the texturing of the head. And as I said, this is a very underrated thing to do. So definitely want to employ that hairlight every now and then. So it just adds more more highlights to the hair. Just brings that hair a bit more to life. Aim you up a little bit higher. Reduce you a wee bit. That's a fun program, the Satellite 3D. Definitely recommend buying it if you want to play around. Kind of pre-visualize what you need to do. And here you can export it. And you snap. So here you can build a collection of lighting diagrams. So for future use, I can collect all of these. So I can just export it. So next time you're in actual studio, physical studio, you can just replicate this and you'll get more or less the same look. So this is a neat way of pre-visualizing, experimenting with different lighting. Something that you can replicate in your own studio. All right, so I still have a lot of people watching and I'm an hour and 12 minutes in. Sure, time flew. All right, so if there's something else that you want me to do, by all means. For the time being, if there's something that is still unclear, still confused about something in terms of, main lights and fill-in lights, room light, etc., you're welcome to ask those. Oh, I missed the question, actually. Sorry about that, Lingy. To create an Omo effect. Good. The terminologies are sticking. Effect, what color must the backdrop be? White, ideally, right? So if you're going to use a gray backdrop, you're going to need very powerful lights to wash out gray in a manner of speaking. If you use a white backdrop, that's just going to be a lot easier to create that pure white effect. Yeah, so if it's a gray or black backdrop, you're going to need to use very, very powerful lighting. Let's try a different colored backdrop. Pink looks good. Okay, so do you think Jerry did a good job today? I'll be sure to tell him. How would you use the UB165? Okay, the UB165, that is a big umbrella from Godot. So it's a parabolic umbrella. So you can buy all of these lights. All right, so let's look for something similar. Okay, don't specifically have 165. The biggest I have here is 180. All right, so it's quite a humongous umbrella. Let's see if we can. Okay, I'm seeing my battery depleted. Hopefully you can still hear me, right? Just give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me. My camera battery just died. You know what? Give me 1 minute. I'm just going to replace batteries, if you don't mind. So talk among yourselves. I'll be with you in a moment. Almost with you. Give me a moment. Sorry, the bracket is stopping me from opening my battery door. Okay, sorry. Just give me an extra minute. Always always a gargoyle and a gremlin here and there, right? Come on. Hello, you can see my beautiful face again. Yeah, see, in the meantime, a couple of questions popped up. Glad to see that. Right, so first we're going to cover UB165, then I'm still getting confused with broad lighting and short lighting. Okay, I'll explain that. Okay, so first, UB165. All right, so the UB165, that is a big umbrella from Godox. So there's a rather directional light source, right, because of the shape of the umbrella. So light is a bit more focused with a parabolic shaped light modifier. So it's not going to give you that nuclear explosion of light. The light is going to be a wee bit more focused. Now, I see a popular way of using the big umbrella is kind of from the top down. Obviously, get rid of the light stand. Plop. And zoom in. Okay, I see a lot of people being fond of this, using the big umbrella from the top down. Okay, so this is a way of using the big umbrella, right? But the big umbrella, that just provides a big focused light, if that makes sense. So the lighting quality is quite unique. So it's a rather big but focused light. I think that's the best way of describing it. So because of the parabolic shape, it just throws light in a far more directional way, but it's also a big spotlight, if that makes sense. So we quite like the parabolic umbrellas, especially if you use it with a diffuser. Unfortunately, this program doesn't have a diffuser covered for the umbrella, but I've seen many photographers use it kind of like this from the above. So to use a C-stand or a boom arm, just to keep that in place, obviously we don't want a light stand in the frame. As you can see, this lovely, very similar, well, it is actually butterfly lighting. It's a very, very soft light because of the size. And again, you can just use, well, let's use a reflector, shall we? Which one? Camera. Oops, there's nowhere where I wanted it. All right, so you can use a reflector board. Let's get that closer. Okay, it's in the shot, so we just need to reposition that closely, or better, should I say. All right, so hopefully you get the idea. I'm just having difficulties moving this damn thing. All right, so with that reflector board in place, you can use any reflector, right? A popular one to use would be the curved reflector. That's my favorite thing in the world, the curved reflector. But we don't have a curved reflector in this program. But with the top light reflecting off the reflector board, that just provides a bit of bottom-up light, just to fill in the shadows created by this humongous umbrella right here. So without it, see the shadows are just a wee bit darker. Up a wee bit. Okay, I think the problem is, let's remove that. Let's get a silver reflector instead. The silver will just bounce back more light. A little bit bigger. Okay, so you just have to figure out a way to shoot past the reflector, because you don't want it in the frame, obviously. But yeah, the reflector just provides a bit of bottom-up reflection, just to fill in the shadows created by the top light. Right, you can use an actual fill-in light, an additional strobe or speed light, or if you're using LEDs, you can use LEDs as well. But yeah, that big umbrella just provides a big focused light, if that makes sense. So it's Very, very nice to use. So it's a very, very popular light modifier, and we sell quite a few of these. We sell dozens a month. Okay, now especially if you use this big umbrella with a diffuser cover. Unfortunately, this program doesn't have a diffuser cover with it. The diffuser cover just helps to soften a light just a wee bit extra. Blip, blip. I had a question regarding short and broad lighting. Okay, I think to explain short and broad lighting, let's just get that up again. I'm still confused with broad and short lighting. If you have time to explain. Okay, let's do that. Okay. Okay, so if you look at my face, right, I can draw an invisible line down the middle of my face, right? So when I look directly at you, both sides of my face will be equally as long, right? So the left-hand side is equally as broad as the right-hand side. However, if I turn to the side, one side becomes shorter based from your point of view than the other side. So if I look away, this side is now shorter as opposed to this one. Okay, so short and broad lighting depends on which side of the face you illuminate. So let's just get back to our program. Okay, so I'm going to ask our model to look slightly away from the camera. All right, so as you can see, because our model has turned away from the camera, we have a shorter side, that's being the model's right-hand side, and a broader side to the person's face, that being the model's left-hand side. So the short side, from our point of view, that's the left-hand side, and the broad side, that's the right-hand side. Now, broad and short lighting depends on which side you illuminate. So short lighting is when we illuminate the short side. Okay, so that is short lighting. All right, and short lighting is the popular one to use because it creates a bit of a thinning effect as well. Whereas with broad lighting, if you illuminate the broad side, okay, that just expands the width, or just creates that illusion that you're expanding the width of the person's face. Okay, so if you want to create that thinning effect, you can utilize short lighting. That is when you ask your model, well, this is a better way of remembering it, right? So short lighting is when you ask your model to look into the direction of your main light. Broad lighting is when you ask your subject to look away from the main light. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So both have their pros and cons, but typically speaking, short lighting is the better one. It just creates a nice thinning effect. Okay, so a better way of remembering it, short lighting is when you ask your model to look more or less in the direction of your main light. Broad lighting is when you ask your model to look away from the main light. I also don't like broad lighting because the catch lights disappear again. So if you ask your model to look into the light, we're going to have those catch lights, but quite minimal. So let's just get a bigger light modifier. Something I should have mentioned, the bigger the light modifier, the bigger those catch lights will be. So let's just zoom, 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 zoom. Okay, so you can see how humongous those catch lights are. So let's go to something smaller just to prove a point. Reduce the intensity again. So you can see those catch lights are now little dots in the eyes, right? Going to a bigger light modifier. So increase the intensity. There we go. Okay, it's also a reason I said why I like short lighting is because you get those catch lights. If the model looks away, catch lights disappear slightly, especially if the model looks too far away. So here is okay. Yeah, so this is technically still broad lighting. Okay, so short lighting and broad lighting depends on which side. So if your model turns his or her face, you're going to have a broad side and a short side based from the photographer's point of view or camera's point of view. And short lighting and broad lighting depends on which side you illuminate. Okay, so that's short lighting. That's illuminating the short side. So you can move it all the way to the side. Okay, so that's a very extreme short light right there. So you can see it's the shorter side of the model's face. So the broad side is not illuminated here whatsoever. We can provide a fill-in light by all means. We can do that. Now, this is something that I like to do quite extensively. It's a very cinematic look, in a manner of speaking. So we can reduce that. Yeah, so you'll find this in a lot of dramatic movies and TV series, like a Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon. Just adds that intrigue, that complexity to our character. Okay, so short lighting, illuminating the short side of the face. Thank you, that makes so much sense now. Okay, pleasure. Glad I could be of service. All right, so no more questions. I'm here all night. I don't have a curfew. Don't know if you have a curfew. So if you want me to stick around, please do ask your questions. Okay. As mentioned right at the beginning, I will talk about stuff like Rembrandt lighting, short and broad lighting, loop lighting, what else is available? Butterfly lighting, hatchet lighting, side lighting, horror lighting. I will cover that more extensively in a future video. So if you're curious about the specific positioning of your main light, why we do that practically speaking and creatively speaking, please check our YouTube channel or on Facebook. So I'll definitely do that in the upcoming weeks. Okay, by all means, a very strange question, but given the reality of power outages, can a studio flash unit be powered using a portable generator? I have not tried that, so I'm not going to make any suggestions here because I don't want you to blow up your house by accident. I've never tried it personally. It's a very good question. There are battery packs available that can power studio strobes. We don't sell them because they are hideously expensive. It's like 15,000 Rand and you can power a couple of strobes with that. So that's effectively like a UPS that you use to power studio strobes when Eskom strikes. The reason why we don't stock that is because it's actually cheaper to buy a battery powered strobe. So if you have strobes already, you can look into it. There's a porty pack. That's a technical term for it. The porty pack, portable pack, in other words. As I said, we don't sell those, unfortunately. But there are such things available. As far as the normal generator is concerned, I don't know. Sorry, that's the short answer I can give you. Probably can experiment with it, but I'll just look into the specs and whatnot if it can be done before you accidentally blow something up. Okay, that's a good question. All right, so if you want to keep me around for longer, please do ask your questions. I think I covered a lot. Don't know what else I missed. Let me look at my notes. Okay, everything I planned on talking about, I spoke about. Okay, so I think there was a very, very good live. 1 hour and 30 minutes in, big chunk of people watching. Very happy to see that. Okay, we're going to do more of these in future. Next week, we have an interview and also doing a photo recipe next week as well. Get my face back up. Hello. Right, so next week we're doing a photo recipe. We're doing an interview as well. The week thereafter, I'll do the different lighting techniques, the Rembrandt lighting, loop lighting, side lighting, forgetting some obvious ones. But we're going to explore all of that. So as far as the specific positioning of your main light is concerned, where to place your light, we'll talk about that more extensively as well. It also pertains to overall mood as well. So if you want to create moody images, that's definitely going to be helpful. So Rembrandt lighting, for example, very moody way of creating or introducing mood to your image. Okay, I see people shoot through scrims. Are you asking how that works? Okay, Just confirm, are you talking about just the scrim panel or something like a shoot-through umbrella? Doesn't matter, let's do both. Okay, I think we have scrims here. Diffuser panel. All right, so a diffuser is a translucent material, right, that you point your light source through, and that's just designed to soften the light. So if you don't have anything that can use a softbox, you can use an external scrim instead. So the 501 reflectors that we sell, if you take the cover off, that will reveal a scrim within the frame. So it's going to look something like this. So I'm just going to make this a bare flash. All right, so you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm shooting through the scrim just to soften a light. So it's one of the golden rules of lighting. The bigger the light source, the softer the light will be. So what we're doing with the scrim here, we're just expanding the size of the light, making it a softer light. So if I take that away, you can see the harshness of the shadows as well. Add that back in. It's going to diminish the light, obviously, but it's just going to soften the light quite substantially. So that is, you can use that if you don't have a light that can use a softbox or umbrella. So if you're using like an LED panel or one of those old-fashioned halogen lamps, the blondes and the redheads, what they call them, etc., etc. There are many types of lights that can't be used with softboxes or umbrellas. They don't have a bracketing system for it. So you can use a scrim just to kind of replicate a softbox, basically. Just be careful with a scrim. You can see this massive shadow it casts. So just be careful not to get that shadow within the photo. So just have to position this carefully. Okay, so to reiterate, that scrim is just a translucent fabric. You can get it in these frames as well, or you can use a 5-in-1 reflector, take the cover off, and it will have the scrim. You just need to get something that can hold onto the scrim, obviously, and you just shoot through it to soften that light. Okay, does that answer your question? If it wasn't a scrim panel, if you're referring to a shoot-through umbrella, I think we have some here. Yeah, shoot-through umbrella is just an umbrella that you shoot through, hence the name. So this also principally designed just to soften the light. Okay, so this is the cheapest light modifier that you can buy. Well, it's about 180 Rand, there or thereabouts. So the shoot-through umbrella, that's just designed to spread the amount of light, obviously creating a bigger light that will create a softer light. So again, to repeat, the bigger the light source is relative to your subject, the softer the light will be. And you can expand the effective size of your light by using different light modifiers. So the bigger the thing, the softer the light will be. Okay, so this just expands the size of the light, thus providing a softer light. Something I don't like about the shoot-through umbrella, it's not very efficient in terms of direction is concerned. So some of this light is going to bounce out backwards, it's going to bounce out through the sides. So that may bounce off the white walls and the white ceiling, and that may just interrupt your entire lighting setup. If you can manage to make that work, by all means, go ahead. But if you want to be very precise with your lighting, the shoot-through umbrellas, that's just your nuclear bomb of light. Light's just going to go everywhere. So you can get something like what is called a Parabolic box. So very similar to a shoot-through umbrella, but it has the black backing. So that just prevents light from spilling out backwards. Okay, so this is a bit more efficient to use. Yeah, that's what it looks like. So it's a shoot-through umbrella, principally speaking, but it has that black backing, and it just prevents light from spilling backwards. Something that may happen is if you position your light like here, right, some of that light spilling out backwards may enter your camera, or the lens, should I say. That may create lens flare. So if you ever have those hazy images, probable reason why is because you have light spillage going into your lens. So this back panel just helps to control the light and aim the light exactly and precisely where you want it to go. Okay, just checking up a lot of questions. I'm happy. Right, so I have two similar questions here. Hi, just logged in. Hello, thank you for joining. Just logged in now. Just wanted to ask, have you covered about speed lights already, or is it not part of the topic today? Which diffuser would you recommend, an umbrella or? Okay, I'll cover that. Any advice for a person starting out in flash photography, wanting to purchase their first flash, but also on a budget? All right, so Facebook user, just as a reminder, if you're commenting in a group, I don't see your name. So if you're in our Godox group or our South African photography community group, just comment your name as well. All right, so this question, this is a topic I covered in the previous video. So I have an entire video out regarding what Godox speedlight to buy, but it also covers speedlights in general. So if you're interested in buying your first speedlight, definitely check out that video. So broadly speaking, it depends on the power source that you want. So if you want a flash with a lithium-ion battery block or AA batteries, we have those options available. Depending on the overall budget that you may have, we have entry-level ones that start at 2,000 going at 3,400 Rand. The flagship models are about 4,500 Rand. That is if you want all of the fancy features, all of the technology, etc. So basically starting from 2,000 Rand, going up to 4,500 Rand. So it just depends on the overall flash technology that you may need. But I have an entire video out, so check out our YouTube channel. That's exactly the previous video I've done, one that I covered. Okay, so to cover this one, I just logged in now. All right, so I have speed lights here. Oops. Okay, but ultimately it doesn't matter that much, right? So here we can see a speed light in an umbrella. The reason I say it doesn't matter that much is because we have brackets available that allow you to use quote-unquote studio softboxes and umbrellas, right? So if you use a Godox, what is known as an S2 bracket, that allows you to use a variety of softboxes and umbrellas with a speed light, right? So you can convert your speed light and you can make it a quote-unquote mono light. Okay, let me see if I can find that on a website. So using that bracket together with the speed light, you can use a variety of softboxes and umbrellas. As far as which one specifically, the softboxes do provide a slightly softer light, but that depending on the size, the bigger the size of the light source is, the softer the light will be. Also, you need to ask some practical questions or questions pertaining to the practical use of a softbox. So we have folding softboxes and non-folding softboxes. So a folding softbox opens up like an umbrella. It has a similar mechanism to it. So that's just very useful for on-location photography. And we have the softboxes that are non-folding. So you have to build those like a tent. So that's a little bit tricky and challenging if you don't know what you're doing. So it may take you anything between 5 minutes to 15 minutes just to set up the softbox, right? So the idea behind those softboxes is once you've built them, once you have assembled them, you kind of just leave them, right? But those are very tricky to transport because you have to find a space in your boot or your back seat just to move them around. So if you're going to move around a lot, a folding softbox I would definitely recommend. In terms of size, a good size is 95 centimeter or 120 centimeters. Bigger, we have bigger ones available, so that will obviously give you a softer light. I personally have a 150 centimeter Photic softbox. That's incredible. That provides an awesome quality of light, but it's way too big for certain environments, right? So it's not the most practical thing to use. So it's just a couple of things that you need to balance out, right? Do you want soft quality of light? Go bigger, but you have to think in terms of space and portability and storage and transportability, etc. as well. So unfortunately, there's no strong answer here. It just depends on a lot of factors and variables, unfortunately. So if you want to buy something specific, a good all-rounder would be the Godox folding softbox, 120 centimeters. It's called the SBGUE. I use that personally as well. Awesome softbox. It's about 1,400 Rand just for the softbox. If you want to use that with a speed light, make sure that you buy a bracket. Let me try and find that bracket on the web. Yeah, here's our website. And it's called the Godox S2 bracket. This is what it looks like. So just mount or clamp your speed light in the back. This allows you to use a variety of softboxes. If it's a Bowens mount specifically, The bones, that's just the name of the type of mount that the softbox uses. So most of our softboxes use the bones mount. Okay, so if you have a speed light and if you want to quote unquote convert that into a studio light, just make sure that you use this bracket and make sure that you have a trigger as well. So the trigger activates or fires the flash remotely from your camera. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Okay, one last thing. Snoots that come with lenses. I'm really curious to know about them. Thank you so much. I was talking about the scrim. You nailed it. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the snoots with lenses, those are called optical snoots. It's my favorite thing at the moment is the optical snoots, and I have one right here. I have a whole bunch of videos covering the optical snoots. So if you want to catch these specifics, just check on our YouTube channel. You'll find one covering the optical snoot. And I think Johannes has a similar question. Yeah, so how to apply a 58mm gobo? Okay, I'll do that. So that relates to the optical snoot as well. Get my face back up. All right, so this is an example of an optical snoot. So it's a snoot with a camera lens attached to it. So that just allows you to create a projection of light, and you can use what is known as a gobo with it. So a gobo is just a stainless steel disc with a shape cut out of it, as you can see there. So that's the start one. Just get that in focus. Hello. Right, so this is specifically a star-shaped gobo. We have a variety of different shapes available. So we have circles, rectangles, Venetian blinds, leafy patterns, etc. We have about 50 odd different shapes available. So if a gobo placed inside of the optical snoot, just slip that in. Bloop. Okay, and with this lens, you can create a focusable beam of light. So you can project this shape, for example, star shape, onto your subject or onto the background. And we have an example in the program. Get that back. Okay, here's our gobo projector, otherwise known as an optical snoot. Zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. All right, so you can use it with different gobos, as they call it. Gobo standing for go between optics. So depending on which one you use, we should have different ones available. Okay, that's our tree-shaped gobo, if you will. And you can we can focus it and defocus it. So you can focus that projection, or you can defocus it. And we have a variety available of camera stuff. If you are interested in specifics, check out the previous videos or contact Camera Stuff directly. I hang out in the chats as well, so if you want to ask for me directly, please do so, and we'll be very happy to help you. All right, so Johannes asking about 58mm gobos. Most of our optical snoots are compatible with the 58mm gobo, so you just need the optical snoot. So you can use those gobos with the optical snoots. So the one I personally have is the Hino S200. Let's get my face back up. This you need to use with Canon lenses. I don't have Canon lenses, so I used a lens converter that converts from Canon to M42, which is a very old-fashioned lens mount. So if you don't have Canon lenses, you can use a lens converter, and you can use whatever you have on the optical snoot. So you can see you can detach the lens. I'm using a 50mm 1.4 on this. But you can use any Canon lens, advisably a Canon full frame lens, and advisably a Canon lens that has a big aperture. But more on the specifics in the other videos, or if you can ask me directly anytime after this, I'm in the chats. So during working hours, I'll be happy to help out. Okay, let's see if I missed anything. So hopefully that answered your question, Johannes, and all of our Facebook users as well. Yeah, so those snoots with the lenses, those are optical snoots. It's my favorite thing to use at the moment. I have a photo recipe covering that. That's one of the previous videos, I think 2 videos before this one, but a couple of videos before that as well. discovering the optical snoot in depth. In fact, I may have a couple of videos here handy. Yeah, let's have a look. All right, so don't think I missed any questions. If I missed a question, please do shout at me, slap me on the wrist. But I think I covered all of the questions. All right, an hour and 48 minutes in. I think this was a very, very good session. I'm going to do more in future, so please do check next week. Interview and also photo recipe. The week thereafter, I'll do the lighting techniques as well. So pertaining to Rembrandt lighting, loop lighting, butterfly lighting, hatchet lighting, side lighting, short lighting, broad lighting, horror lighting. I might be forgetting an obvious one, but all of them will be covered. Okay, so as far as we losing my words, it's been a long session. As far as the specific positioning of your main light is concerned, do check in 2 weeks' time. Okay, but I think that's it from my side. It's been a very, very good session. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for interacting. This is exactly what we want. This is the reason why we do it live, so that we can interact with you guys. So that's it from my side. So thank you for joining. That's it from me, Conrad, on behalf of Camera Stuff. Yeah, so do you enjoy your night further? Hope it's a good one. So cheerios, that's it from my side. So clicking button and we do the awkward